My name is Joshua M1, Chapter 12, Romantic Interludes in Japan, in 1888. Next. So, February 28, April 13, 1888. He was enchanted by the natural beauty of Japan, so the charming manners of the Japanese people and the picturesque shrines. Moreover, he fell in love with a Japanese girl whose loveliness infused joy and romance in his sorrowing heart. So her real name was Seiko Usoy. So Rizal affectionately called her Osei-san. Fate, however, cut short his happy days in Japan, so he had to sacrifice his own happiness to carry on his work for the redemption of his oppressed people. Next. So Rizal Rizal arrived in Yokohama. Early in the morning of Tuesday, February 28, 1888, Rizal arrived in Yokohama. He registered at the Grand Hotel. So the next day, he proceeded to Tokyo and took room at Tokyo Hotel where he stayed from March 2 to 7. He was impressed by the city of Tokyo. He wrote to Professor Blumentritt, Tokyo is more expensive than Paris, so the walls are built in cyclopean manner. Street are large and wide. Next. So Rizal in Tokyo. Shortly after Rizal arrival in Tokyo, he was visited at his hotel by Juan Perez Caballero, Secretary of Spanish Legation. So the letter invited him to live at the Spanish Legation. So Rizal, being an intelligence man, realized that the Spanish diplomatic authorities were instructed from Manila to monitor his movement in Japan. So he accepted the invitation for two reasons. So what? Next. So he could, number one is he could economize his living expenses by staying at the legation. And number two, he had nothing to hide from the praying eyes of the Spanish authorities. Next. So on March 7, Rizal checked out of Tokyo Hotel and lived at the Spanish legation. So he and Perez Caballero become good friends. So in letter to Blumentritt, he described the Spanish diplomat as young, fine, and excellent rider, and unable to diplomat who had traveled much. So during his first day in Tokyo, Rizal embarrassed. Ay, next na ito dyan. Next. So, first day on Tokyo. So, during his first day in Tokyo, Rizal was embarrassed because he did not know the Japanese language. He looked like Japanese but could not talk Japanese. So, he had a hard time shopping for he could not understood and Japanese children laughed at him. So, thus, he wrote to Blumentritt, here you have your friend Rizal, the wonder of the Japanese, who has the face of the Japanese but does not speak Japanese. So on the street when I go shopping, people look at me at ill-educated children. So laugh because I speak such a strange language in Tokyo. Very few persons speak English, but in Yokohama many speak it. Some believe I am Europe, Europeans, Japanese who does not want to be taken such. To avoid further embarrassment, Rizal decided to study the Japanese language, being a born linguist. So he was able to speak it within a few weeks. He also studied the Japanese drama, kabuki, arts, music, and judo, Japanese art of self-defense. So he brought browse in the museum, libraries, art galleries, and charming village of Japan. Next. So Rizal and the Tokyo musicians. One cool afternoon in March 1888, Rizal was promenading in the street of the Tokyo near the park. It was a beautiful spring afternoon. There were many people at the park. So as he approaches the park, Rizal heard the Tokyo band playing a classical work of Strauss. He was impressed by the super performance of the Western music. So he stopped and listened in the rapt attention. So he thought how admirable was the rendition. I wonder how these Japanese people have assimilated the modern European music to the extent of playing the beautiful musical masterpiece of the great European composer so well. Next.
To continue the discussion, I'm Louie Balmores. Rizal impression of Japan. Rizal was favorably impressed by Japan, who was seeing an observer taking copious note on the life, custom, and culture of the people. Things which favorably impressed Rizal in Japan were the beauty of the country, its flower, mountains, stream, and scenic panoramas, the cleanliness, politeness, and industry of Japanese people, the picturesque dress and simple charm of the Japanese woman. There were very few thieves in Japan, so that the houses remained open day and night, and the hotel room one could safely leave money on the table. Beggars were rarely seen in the city street, unlike in Manila and other cities. Romance with Oseisan. Oseisan, or Seiko Usui, a samurai daughter, a 23 years old and pretty Japanese girl whom Rizal was attracted by her regal loveliness and charm. Rizal and Oseisan, as Rizal called her, met almost daily. Together they visited the interesting spot of the city, the Imperial Art Gallery, the Imperial Library, the universities, the Shokobutsuen or Botanical Garden, the city park, particularly Hibaya Park, and the picturesque shrines. Rizal saw in lovely Oseisan the qualities of his ideal womanhood: beauty, charm, modesty, and intelligence. No wonder he fell deeply in love with her. Oseisan helped Rizal in many ways. More than sweetheart, she was his guide, interpreter, and tutor. She guided him in observing the shrine and villages around Tokyo. She improved his knowledge of the Mongo, which is the Japanese language and Japanese history. Rizal on Oseisan. Rizal great love for Oseisan is attested by the hero diary. With the tenderly tragic entry in his own diary, Rizal bade farewell to lovely Oseisan. Oseisan, as a beauty and affection, almost tempted Rizal to settle down in Japan. At the same time, he was offered a good job at his parents' location. So ito si Oseisan. Next is Sayonara Japan on April 13, 1888. On April 13, 1888, Rizal boarded the Belgic, an English steamer at Yokohama, bound for the United States. He left Japan with a heavy heart, for he knew that he would never again see this beautiful land of the cherry blossom. And beloved Oseisan, truly his sojourn in Japan for 45 days was one of the happiest interlude in his life. Oseisan after Rizal departure. As everything on earth has to end, the beautiful romance between Rizal and Oseisan inevitably came to a dolorous ending. Sacrificing his personal happiness, Rizal had to carry on his libertarian mission in Europe. Accordingly, he resumed his voyage, leaving behind the lovely Oseisan, whom he passionately loved. So Oseisan was broken-hearted by the departure of Rizal, the first man to capture her heart. About 1997, the year Rizal execution, she married Mr. Alfred Charlton, who is a British teacher of chemistry of the Peirce School in Tokyo and died on November 2, 1915. Survived by Osei-san, whose real name was Seiko Sui, and their daughter Yuri. Mrs. Charlton or Osei-san as a widow lived in a comfortable home in Shinjuku District, Tokyo, survived World War II, but their home was destroyed in 1944 by the US bombing of Tokyo. She died on May 1, 1947, at the age of 80. Her daughter Yuriko later married Yoshiharu Tagikuchi, son of a Japanese senator. Voyage across the Pacific. Despite his sorrowing heart, Rizal enjoyed the pleasant trans-Pacific voyage to the United States. On board the ship, he met a semi-Filipino family, Mr. Rinaldo Turner, his wife Emma Jackson, daughter of an Englishman, their maid and servant from Pangasinan. Rizal and Techo. Another passenger which Rizal befriended on board the Belgic was Techo Suhiro, a fighting Japanese journalist, novelist, and champion of human rights, was forced by the Japanese government to leave the country. Just as Rizal was compelled to leave the Philippines by the Spanish authorities, learning of his predicament, Rizal, who knew many foreign languages including Japanese, befriended him and acted as his interpreter during their long trip from Yokohama to San Francisco, across the US to New York until they reached London, where they parted. Rizal and Techo were kindred spirit, both were valiant patriots, implacable foes of justice and tyranny. Both were men of peace using their trenchant pens as formidable weapon to fight for their people's welfare and happiness. In 19 in 1890, Techo was elected as a member of the lower house of the First Imperial Diet, or Japanese Parliament, where he carried on his fight for human rights. The following year, 1891, he published a political novel entitled Nankai no Daiharan, or Storm Over the South Sea, which resembled Rizal's No Limitang Hire in plot. 3 years later, 1894, he published another novel entitled O Unabara, which is the Big Ocean, which was similar to El Filibusterismo. Techo died of the heart attack in Tokyo in February 1896, 10 months before Rizal's execution. He was then 49 years old. That's the end of chapter 12.